Welcome to another episode of the Fine Blue Line Podcast. Two cops, from cops, for cops, where we discuss issues, trends, products, and so much more. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fine Blue Line Podcast. Today we have Keith Grounsell with us, and Keith is an author and used to work as an undercover police officer. And he's going to talk to us about a series of books that he wrote and kind of how that whole thing came about and how he got into writing books. I always think it's interesting when you're talking to police officers. And I've thought many times through my career, man, I should write a book about some of this shit, you know. And Keith took the time to make some notes throughout his career, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about that. And he'll tell you why he did that. It wasn't necessarily in the best interest of writing a book later in his career. It had other reasons for writing notes down on his cases. So he's going to talk to us about that and how the books came to fruition and how many there are in the series, all that good stuff. So Keith, how's it going, buddy?
What's going on, Rob? I just wanted to thank you for having me on here, being able to talk to fellow cops across the United States. I appreciate that very much.
Well, you'll be happy to know that it's listened to in usually about 20 countries per episode. So
wow.
You're going to be talking to a lot of cops from the United States and Canada, and then you'll get some from Australia, Europe, just downloaded in the Middle East a couple times. I'm guessing that's maybe cops on deployment. And those guys, yeah, exactly, right? Keep your head down, be safe out there, boys.
Exactly. So maybe I'll have some friends on here. I spent 6 years on deployments with U.S. Department of State as a senior law enforcement advisor in multiple countries. So hopefully, shout out to all my boys and girls in blue overseas.
I like it. Well, Keith, I'm going to give you an opportunity here. Just kind of introduce yourself. Share as much or as little as you want. You can go through your career path, and we'll kind of start there.
All right, great, man. Well, first and foremost, like I said, thanks for having me on here. I've been truly blessed in the last 22 years I spent in law enforcement, working at just about every level. I've worked from city police officer to county narcotics investigator to special agent with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. I've been lead investigator for a prosecutor's office. I've worked overseas internationally as a senior law enforcement advisor on U.S. Department of State missions. Also did United Nations missions. I've been in the countries of Haiti for a couple of years. I did Liberia and West Africa a couple of years. I spent 2 years in Africa, or 2 years in Afghanistan as well. Traveled to India, Jordan, done just an array of different things, man. It's not because I'm great, anything like that. I just truly have been at the right place at the right time, and I was willing to take off. And, you know, that's been rather rough on the family life, to be honest with you, and so was my undercover career. You know, 6 out of my 22 years, I worked deep undercover, and didn't start out with the intentions in law enforcement of going undercover. I had a knack kind of early on in my career going after drug dealers. I kind of got a natural high off of it. Anybody, you know, who likes to do drug interdiction can relate a little bit with me on that. I love to hunt down drug dealers. That's what I did. Every day I went into work, tried to seek out in certain areas where they were, you know, causing problems in certain neighborhoods. And I love the analytical side of the investigation, you know, finding out who's dealing, who they're working with, and tracking them down and taking them out and cleaning up a community. So, you know, I told you earlier, you know, one of the things that when I first started in law enforcement, I spent about 3 years working on patrol, the community policing, bicycle patrol. I had this high that I got working narcotics cases, even from a simple possession case all the way to, you know, trafficking cocaine or crack cocaine case or something like that. But it's kind of rare that you got to those higher level cases when you're on uniform patrol because you're so busy responding to calls for service. So I had changed from one agency to another agency after about 3 years, and I was sitting in orientation, and 2 guys with beards come in there, knock on the door, interrupt the orientation, and say, you know, shout my name, Keith Grounsell. Hey, we need you to step outside. Now, first I asked them who they were. They showed me their credentials. They were narcotics investigators in the Bison Narcotics Unit, and they took me up to a captain's office, and they said, from now on, you're no longer allowed to associate with police officers. You're working undercover with Bison Narcotics. They didn't really tell me any details And at the time, they were looking for a young face. I just think I fit the description of what they were looking for. And they threw me undercover in the rave scene, the ecstasy scene. And it was something that I really didn't know anything about. I was not raised, around drugs or anything like that. I'd seen, a few things growing up from small amounts of marijuana, but nothing hardcore, or especially not the ecstasy crowd, the all-night dance parties they call raves. And surprisingly, I was somewhat successful. I spent a few months working undercover, took out 47 different drug dealers, spanning across the state. And then they asked me to stick around and pose as a crackhead and going into some of the rough areas and buying crack cocaine and then buying heroin. And that was a totally different experience for me, going from being clean cut, where when I was working undercover in the raves, I bleached my hair blonde, pierced my ears, try to get in and study that lingo and what I was looking for, to going undercover as a crackhead, where I wore the same clothes for months and months every day. And, I stank, I didn't shave. It really kind of took its mental toll on me. So long story short, I ended up going a year undercover. The chief of police at the time didn't like it if the officer was more than a year deep undercover, and decided to pull me out. And about that time, I started to get recruited to go to the sheriff's office. And I went to the sheriff's office in a short period. I was put back undercover, working in the Vice and Narcotics unit there, and spent about 3 years. And that's where I really honestly learned so much. I finally got some training. I went to federal undercover school. I ended up becoming a guest instructor at the undercover school that I actually went to as a student. And I just started to excel from there. I had some great partners, had some great mentors along the way. Senior narcotics investigators had been doing it for 20, 30 years. And I just shut up and listened to these guys, and they taught me so much. And, I'd always had the intentions of trying to reach the highest level. I always wanted to make the biggest case, like everybody does, So when I was with the sheriff's office, we made a undercover operation where we took out 115 drug dealers across our county. That spanned into multiple states, but, it was a pretty big deal because we weren't doing informant buys. We were doing straight undercover police. And me and my partner, we brought another undercover in that we trained. We were successful in that operation, which is talked about in volume 1 of the 4-book series, A NARC'S TALE, which is what I'm talking to you about today, is basically, it starts out in volume 1, working undercover as a city police officer. And then it goes volumes 2 and 3 is undercover as a county vice and narcotics investigator. And then volume 4 is undercover as a DEA special agent. And, like I said, I went to the county, had great experiences there, but I wanted to achieve the pinnacle of undercover work, which I thought was the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. So I went through the long 2-year hiring process and was hired on, and eventually got stationed based out of the St. Louisville Division, Kansas City District Office, way out west in western Kansas. And I worked out there, and I just really, be honest with you, it was an eye-opening experience. I didn't know how big of a hub, Kansas was, because the drugs coming in from Mexico up through Texas, up to I-70, going East Coast, West Coast. And the price of drugs in the Midwest were, for example, it was $6,000 for a pound of crystal meth ice versus on the East Coast, $18,000. And it was 95 to 100% pure. And it was just a great experience. And the law enforcement officers I worked with from the East Coast to the West Coast were phenomenal, man. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go in law enforcement. We're all the same. We're all brothers and sisters. We all have the same purpose. We generally don't make a lot of money. We don't do it for the money. We do it for the love, do it for the hunt, things like that. So I decided to start writing about it. I started writing notes early on, especially when I went undercover. I started seeing I was missing out on a lot of things with my children. And I wanted to make sure I documented what I was doing so I could one day tell the story to my kids. And that was my intention, was to write an autobiography or a manuscript and eventually just give it to my kids. So over time, as I was writing down notes, very detailed notes, minute, right to the point of what my undercover props were, how I created fake drugs, how I did different things. And I had all that So when I went to write my stories, the details were phenomenal. I mean, so I told these stories to a few of my friends, and they were like, man, you need to write a book that, like, for the public. So I started writing, and then I realized I don't just want to write about the undercover experience. I want to write about what was going through my mind, you know, how this affected my marriage, how this affected my relationship with my kids, how was my temper, you know, during this time period when I was, you know, self-isolating myself, becoming recluse so I didn't run into drug dealers when I'm out with my wife and kids. You know, all these things I write about in the book. And I think it does a pretty good job. I've had guys who've been in law for 20, 25 years write me and be like, man, listen, I work vice narcotics. I never knew this because I didn't concentrate in undercover work, and I appreciate you explaining it from this perspective so people have a better understanding of what it's like to truly work undercover. You know, there's a misconception out there. You got a lot of people in vice narcotics are plainclothes police officers, and people think that's deep undercover, or that's undercover, and that's plainclothes police officers is different from working undercover. You know,
right.
and that's something that a lot of people don't know the difference in, and I think I do a pretty good job at explaining that. And like I said, you know, being at the right place at the right time for different assignments, being willing to put yourself out there. It might sound a little crazy, but early on in my career, I was almost a little bit reckless, where I had this mindset of I thought I was going to die before I was 30. And I know that sounds crazy. I went federal at the age of 30. But I had this mindset of, if I'm going to die, you know, I'd rather die heroically and do something. I kind of like, well, if you're going to go out, you might as well go out in a blaze of glory. You know, I'd rather go out in a gunfight, taking out some bad guys. You know, that's a dream, obviously, if you got to go that way. Now I look at it with children and things like that. Hopefully I live a long life and I don't have to worry about anything like that. But it was a 15-year journey to complete these 4-book series, A NARC'S TALE, and you know, I poured my heart and soul into it. I spoke with multiple agents before I published and stuff like that, and a lot of them were trying to change my story. They wanted me to take out the mental effects. They wanted to take out the stuff about how it affected my marriage, how I would lose my temper at times, and I would have to catch myself. I didn't want to take that out. I wanted to keep it raw. And listen, I'm not a guy who reads a ton of undercover books or anything, and I did that intentionally because I didn't want to write like anybody else. I have my own unique style. I don't try and mimic or match some other style. This is me. It's not for everybody, and I realize that. But I can tell you, if you read this 4-book series and you're a young police officer, aspiring police officer, interested citizen, or just somebody who wants to learn about the drug trade and to know how to parent better, this will tell you everything. And I originally was hesitant in publishing anything, but over the years, the DEA has had their documentary films. They've had reality TV shows about undercover cops, and I feel a little bit safer actually putting it out now. If it wasn't for those people doing that before, there's no way I would have put a book like this out. I'd have just had it as a manual to work undercover and sold it to cops only. But I mean, I put stuff in there. I changed all the names to protect myself from, you know, hits on my life and things like that, and to make sure they don't try and come after my family. And a lot of the pictures, there's over 340 something pictures, almost 350 pictures, and copies of newspaper articles and different publication information throughout all these 4 books to authenticate some of the stories, to bring it to a face to the words. And being a visual guy, that's about the best you can do when it comes to a book. You know, it's not a movie or anything like that. So, I mean, I got hours and hours of undercover videos, from murders for hire to multi-kilo deals, to buying automatic weapons, to purchasing small quantities of drugs, to drug takedowns, to buying children undercover and posing as a pedophile, to, you know, you name it. And they're all explained in the book, but it's, you know, I can't put a video in the book. So I think a video wouldn't do justice as detailed as I am in these books series. So I hope people enjoy it. And so far, so good.
So quick question for you. you talked about the relationships, how it changed. When you first started Undercover, so when you went to agency number 2 and they came and got you out of orientation, first off, didn't sound like you had much of a choice there.
No. It was kind of shocking, but it was kind of exciting because I was like, here's the bad part. So have you ever done anything that's really cool and, like skydiving or something very exciting, adrenaline dump type of stuff? The first thing you want to do is you want to go tell people about it. That's the first thing. Well, undercover work is kind of like that, but you can't tell anybody. So it's kind of like you're doing all this crazy, elaborate stuff, and it's like something like that you would see in a movie, but yet you can't tell anybody. So writing was almost like a therapy for me. Getting it on paper, to have it for later on to tell my kids so they would think it's cool. Kids already think their dad and moms are cool with their cops. I mean, that's just something we grow up with. Even in this bullcrap society now with all the hate towards police, the reality is we do a job and we save lives and we help people and we love people. I don't give a damn what they say, all these hate groups and stuff like that. But, I mean, it's just a way to explain, the behind the scenes, what's going on and why I did what I did for my kids to make it a better world.
Okay, I got you. I'm tracking. So back to my question here. So in the second agency, they pull you out of orientation, and you don't have much of a choice. You're going undercover. Were you married at that point?
So this is the funny part. So I just met my wife, and we were dating, and all of a sudden, I go undercover, and I lied to everybody. I told my parents I got fired, all sorts of things, and she was the only one that actually knew, and that's when I knew she was a keeper. It was kind of like, she never told it. So her friends are coming up to her, is like, I saw your boyfriend out at the strip club. I saw your boyfriend hanging out with drug dealers. He's a piece of crap, and she just shut her mouth and didn't say anything. So when I went undercover in the ecstasy ring, I bleached my hair blonde. Going into work about 10 o'clock at night. I was working all night long in the raves. Some rumor got back to my mom, my parents, who lived locally, that I was a stripper. And so my mom's freaking out. She's all upset. Now all my buddies are calling me. I changed my phone number because they're like, there ain't no way, because Keith was a straight-laced cop. I got in a lot of, altercations and stuff like that because I was very assertive and aggressive, but it just blew people's minds. So I just let the rumor mill spread, and you know how that works. I mean, that was before social media. It doesn't matter. One phone call is all it takes, and 100 people know. You're getting phone calls from your buddies, and the funny part was sometimes you had a few friends that was like, I knew he was dirty, so you kind of laughing about it afterwards, but you can't come out of your role or anything like that. And one of the things I did do early on in my undercover career was I targeted some dirty cops. And, good cops hate dirty cops. So you know that, like most, man, they tarnish the badge. They make us look bad. They destroy all the work that we've done for over 100 years. And it's just a ridiculous thing. So I was proud to take out dirty cops,
When I was in detectives, I took out a small town police chief, so I know what you're talking about.
You get it, man. Hey, I'll tell you, later on, after undercover work, I was the chief of police, and I fought corruption there as well. Right? From, my mayor was indicted and convicted of public corruption-related things. We had a head of investigations that for many years prior to my time as chief of police, he pled guilty to tamper with evidence to cover up in a murder investigation and a rape investigation, all things that I was blowing the whistle on and lost my job as a result. I fought to get it back after 14 months, and we did well. But in that position, all my undercover work helped out. Well, I brought in a DEA task force agent from Kansas who just so happened to fly into South Carolina and Charlotte. He actually flew into Charlotte, North Carolina on a drug-related murder. And I asked him to stay a couple extra days, and I trained my entire department in drug interdiction and basic drug investigations. And over the course of about a year and a half, we increased our drug arrests 287%. And we literally went from the number 28 safest town in the state of South Carolina to number 1 in 2 years. And, that was a big feat. And I chalk it all up to undercover work and then community policing. And the community policing helped us to develop leads. And we were very aggressive going after drug dealers to where the reputation got out from our agency. Hey, drug dealers were like, hey, I'm not meeting you in that town. I'll meet you right next door, but I'm not coming in that town and selling drugs. So, I mean, it was pretty cool, man. I always find a drug nexus. It seems like wherever I go, when I went to Afghanistan, I was a national commander over 144 Americans, and we did all the training of the national SWAT team and riot teams there for 2 years, and we worked alongside of the poppy eradication program, which, as you know, Afghanistan at the time provided 95% of the world's opium, which is used and processed into heroin, and it funded Al-Qaeda for all their terrorist network around the world. So, there's gun battles and all sorts of crazy things happen when you do poppy eradication. And so I talk about that at the very end of my volume 4 of my books, The Contract World. Then go into Haiti. The Haitians, gangsters deal with the Colombian cartels. 10% of the U.S. cocaine market comes from Colombia via Haiti because it's a transshipment point. It's literally right in the middle between Colombia, South America, and the United States. So the drugs are offloaded in Haiti a lot of times because they don't have a large coast guard. They sit there and they make sure the DEA and some of the federal agencies are not watching it. And then in the middle of the night, gets on a boat, fast boat, and they take it to the U.S. in different distribution points. So we're always doing interdiction. I was working with some of my former colleagues with DEA, getting intel, trying to take out loads, and then went to Liberia, was always trying to advise the narcotics unit because I was the senior advisor to the Inspector General, who was the commander over a 5,000 man and woman police force for the nation. So we had a huge narcotics unit. Then we had the Liberian Drug Enforcement Administration, and a lot of the drugs came through Nigeria as a big shipment point in Africa. And it was just, it's kind of funny, you can't get it out of your blood. Once you find the love in law enforcement, I'm sure you have the same thing. Once you find something that you're good at and something that you're passionate about, you just go with it. And that's kind of, what happened with me. And I still to this day, I started writing drug education articles for a local newspaper when I was chief of police in Simpsonville, South Carolina. And it's crazy, but I ended up winning the South Carolina Press Association Award for public education articles. And it was to the point when I stopped writing the articles about, these were some of the short stories, that are in my book as well, that some of the inmates from one of the prisons, the state prisons, wrote. The newspaper was like, hey, are y'all going to come out with some more drug articles? Because we enjoy reading them. so this guy, I kind of laugh about it, but I mean, hey, whatever it takes, man. I mean, if they might laugh about them, but the reality was some of them might have been getting educated about, hey, man, it's a deterrent. Next time I'm thinking about doing this, there might be an undercover out there, that's going to take me out. So maybe they won't do that. That's the wishful thinking side of things, obviously.
You don't want that stuff in your area, but ultimately you're responsible for the city that you're working for, and whatever you can do to push them out of your responsible area.
Yeah, there was a lot of pride amongst the officers. The officers did an exceptional job, and we partnered with the community. And as you know, when you're in a community, it doesn't matter if you have 1 million people, 25,000 people, 5,000 people. If you partner with the community, you're bringing in 1 million extra sets of eyes and ears. And they're going to report stuff to you. But the key is not to burn them. When they report stuff to you, use the information, never let it get out. Develop your independent probable cause. Use it to further your investigation. As long as you take care of your people, they're going to continuously bring you information on a consistent basis. And that's where we were able to find success. And I made sure that my younger officers, my younger investigators, narcotics investigators especially, understood that. I go into great detail in my books, especially books 2 and 3, about informants. And I had one professional informant that was an informant since 1976. And I go into great detail about how this informant survived, testifying way more times than everybody in my vice narcotics unit together. And what you have to do when you're dealing with informants, because they're slick. They're involved in the criminal world. And They're informants for a reason. And they're good at what they do because they're involved in it currently. And they're always trying to manipulate you and try and get you to where they have something over you. And how you play them will determine how successful you are in the undercover world. But I always cut out informants. I might bring an informant in to do an introduction, but I would cut them out of the loop as fast as I could because they weren't reliable as a police officer. A police officer later on will be there to testify. An informant, we don't know where that informant's going to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road when it actually goes to trial. So, I learned a lot from trial and error, and I'm not ashamed to tell my errors throughout these books. And that's why I think it, like I've said before, it humanizes me, to make sure everybody sees it's not because I was great, I'm the best. No way. I mean, I'm not, by no means. There's plenty of people that were way better than me. I just so happened to listen. I always learned. I was constantly striving to get the next class. I would study movies. Like, I learned something. Like, actors actually that play an exceptional role as an addict or as a drug dealer or something like that, they study their roles. And that's what I was role playing as an undercover. So I took it very serious and I studied my role. And I tried to always take it to the next level. I was always kind of known as an innovative guy. I remember when I was working undercover with the feds, with the DEA, and I'm trying to get in with this cartel, and I can't get up on their phones. We're trying to do a federal wiretap on them. They keep throwing their phones literally every week or 2 weeks. One guy went through 9 phones. He threw one out the window because it clicked one time when we were behind them. I mean, it's kind of comical. But, I mean, I decided when I was introduced to this guy and worked my way up to a lieutenant in this cartel. I wasn't a lieutenant. I worked my way up into dealing with the lieutenant in this cell of the cartel. And I convinced him that I could get untraceable cell phones. And I literally linked up with a cell phone carrier, a CEO, and he sent me phones that were demo phones that weren't on the market. And every month we would trade. I would go meet with the cartel. I'd give them phones. They would give me pounds of drugs, and we would trade. And it was crazy, but we were up on wiretaps on these phones. And they thought I was dumping the phone, but I was using law enforcement technology to actually dump it. And I told them I was erasing the memory, but I was just taking everything out for court purposes. They were so dumb, man. They were gullible, man. And I tell about things like that throughout the book series. I had a guy one time call the wrong phone number, literally called my number. He asked for somebody else. I could hear a party in the background. I get to talking to the guy. Next thing I know, within a few days, I'm buying cocaine and pills off this guy. So, I mean, it's just things like that can fall in your laps, from doing drug deals on the courthouse steps with guys that are in drug court to, anything. The sky's the limit as an undercover. You just got to be innovative and be willing to try different things.
So, a couple of questions. Where did we find your books, and do we have to read them in the sequence? So, volume 1, 2, 3, 4. If you took, say, 3, took them out of sequence, yeah. Would that cause a problem?
Okay, great question. So, first, you can find the books in several places. Grounsellbooks.com. That's GROUNSELLBOOKS.com. And that's my last name is Ground without the D and Sell, Grounsell. And then you can also find them on Amazon. It's A NARC'S TALE, and it's volume 1 through 4. And you do not have to read them in order. I would suggest reading them in order, because literally volume 1 starts out in the middle of an undercover deal where they had planned to kidnap me and kill me. I didn't know this at the time, and I'm fighting with the guy in the front cab of my truck, and he's trying to get me to snort some cocaine. And I hit the bag of cocaine and it hits the ceiling. So I stop right there and I say, in order to understand why I did what I did in this situation, you need to understand a little bit about my background. And then I go into my background and my upbringing and some mistakes I made in my life. And thank God I was able to overcome them and became a police officer. And then that helped to understand later on throughout the book series why I maybe decide to fight in this situation versus try and run from this situation versus try and talk my way out of this situation. And I think it helps to understand the background a little bit, but you don't have to. The book series is kind of cool because you can literally pick it up and read one chapter or there's several subsections. They're all short stories. And each short story ends with a conclusion. And at the conclusion, I put what happened in the trial. Were they convicted? What happened afterwards? Like, I try and explain if there was a child involved, what happened to the child. So I didn't want to leave people hanging. You know, I think that was very important because, you know, you hear a lot of stories, but a lot of times you hear the action, but you don't ever hear. Some people are more interested in, okay, that's cool and exciting, but what happened? You know, what's the conclusion of this? So you can pick up any of these books and literally read a section, read a chapter, put it down, pick it up 6 months later, and start right there, and you'll be good to go. So, I mean, it depends if you're a reader, you know, you want to read them all, obviously, from the city undercover to the county undercover to the federal undercover. And then it talks about at the end, some of the contracting and the drug nexus and stuff. But I would definitely, if you just want to be a DEA special agent, I go into elaborate details on the entire hiring process, the pros and cons of the DEA, some of the things I saw with the bureaucracy, some of the things I liked, some of the things I didn't like in book 4. But if you want to understand the difference between city narcotics and county narcotics, from book 1 to book 2. And it just depends, you know, what you're looking for. But if you want to understand the whole gamut of undercover work and what it's like to work undercover at every single level, and I think that's what differentiates this book series. I've seen some other book series, undercover book series. They predominantly are working undercover either as a federal agent, working undercover as a cop, working undercover as a narcotics investigator. I haven't seen one yet that does every level, from city to county to federal. And it talks about the process, you know, throughout and how I achieved and got from one level to the next level. So I think that kind of helps a little bit if somebody wants to learn every aspect of undercover work.
That is a new twist on it. Hey, so one other question for you. So mom thinks you're a stripper.
Yeah.
You don't tell her you're working undercover. So did were you able to tell your mom at some point in your life that, hey, this is what I was doing? How'd that go?
So, yeah, my mom is like Miss Santa Claus. She's probably the sweetest lady in the world. My father was a 22-year United States Marine, tough guy. You know, so I got best of both worlds being raised with 2 wonderful parents. But, yeah, so my mom is the sweetest lady on the planet. I mean, I literally cannot keep her hanging. When I told her, she's like, she wasn't even worried about undercover work. She was just so happy I wasn't a stripper and I didn't get fired. So it was kind of like, she's like, oh, thank God, thank God. And then she forgot about the danger factor, you know, that was it. So I literally, throughout my marriage, throughout everything working undercover, I didn't really tell my wife a lot of this stuff and you'll read about it in the book series. I had a couple of hits on my life in different moments from different gangs or cartels and things like that, from stuff that I had done and some of my other guys in my unit as well. And I never really told her. I tried to protect her. And she's like, listen, I'm glad you didn't tell me these things, because I would have totally freaked out. My anxiety, I would have gone off the deep end, you know, knowing these things. And so a lot of it I bottled up. And I talk about that in the book. You know, I held a lot of stress in, and that's not really a good thing, especially not in law enforcement right now. You see, you know, high suicide rates and PTSD and things like that. I didn't realize that I was suffering from some depression at the time, from being recluse, not having any friends outside of law enforcement, you know, that I really associated with much. And when I was off duty, I didn't want to go out because I spent all my time in the clubs. You know, when you are told to go to the nightclub day in and day out, and you drink beer and you do this, and you're just like, man, I'm tired of that crap. I don't want to do that anymore. So I literally stayed at home. But my one outlet throughout it, and still to this day, is working out. That was my key. And I talk about that, you know, when I'm doing an undercover assignment. If I'm posing as an addict, I did a lot of cardio so I didn't bulk up. But if I'm posing as, one time I went undercover in a steroid ring. So, of course, you know, I took tons of protein and bulked up to do that role. I literally tried to live the role, and that's not good for family life. And I would catch myself talking a certain way at home towards my wife sometimes, which is not cool. And I talk about those things in the book because, you know, when you're dealing with thugs and criminals all the time, and I'm not a big dude, but I always came across as a crazy dude. And a lot of times people don't want to mess with a crazy guy, and that was intentional. So I came across as crazy to keep them away from me, to not want to challenge me or anything like that. I had one of my partners with the DEA was almost 6'6", about 320 pounds. And I used to tell him, you read about him in book before I tell. I was like, Big Pat, I said, bro, you got to calm down. You got to tone it down because you scare the hell out of people when you walk in the room. I said, when I walk in the room, nobody really thinks twice. I'm just a regular guy. For me, I had to do something to put an edge out there to show me in a different light. You know, they naturally aren't going to go mess with the 6'6", 300-plus pound guy, but they might mess with the guy that's average size or something like that, unless they think he's crazy and he's got a lot of guns. So that was kind of my persona that I presented, always carrying multiple guns and a crazy man. And it worked for me. It was something that I did. And, you know, I remember one situation where I was undercover and I went to I didn't know it, but it was an active meth lab, and which is a no-no. You don't want to walk into an active meth lab if you can help it. But I was working undercover buying meth, and I got there, and the guy had been up for, I think, almost 14 days straight tweaking. And he had all his guns laid out, and he had been taking them apart and putting them back together, taking them apart and putting them back together. Some were loaded, some weren't loaded, and he wanted to share with me all his guns. So every time he'd hand me a gun, I would unload it, you know, to make sure that it was safe, and I always gave it back to him unloaded, and he wasn't catching this. And then he's asking me about guns, and, you know, I had 3 guns on me at the time, and I just led him to believe I had 1 on me. And, of course, you know, he wants to see my gun, which is not something you want to do undercover. But when you're in a situation where the guy's tweaking, he's been up 14 days, he's going back and forth to the mini blinds looking outside. Did you see him? Did you hear that? He's paranoid as hell. He's got guns everywhere. So I took my gun out, unloaded it, you know, made sure that it was safe and showed it to him. But he thought he had my gun. But the reality was I had 2 more on me. So I did a lot of different things, and from creating my own fake drugs. You know, I talk about how I snorted my own fake cocaine that had lidocaine, a numbing agent used for like cold sores and canker sores, that I actually practiced snorting and used it undercover because it numbed your nasal cavity. And, you know, I made sure that when I used like my fake marijuana, my wacky weed stuff that we used to get that had no THC in it, that if I had to share it, it was a bad situation that I was in, I made sure they were already high on something else so they wouldn't know the difference. So it's kind of, you know, you have to be careful when you're doing stuff as an undercover because you can get called out quick. I remember one time getting kicked out of a nightclub for smoking a fake joint in the bathroom while I was buying cocaine from a guy. And I thought it was hilarious because I'm getting kicked out, you know, as an undercover guy trying to clean up their club, but for fake drugs, but they thought they were real. Right. So, it's some comical stuff, and, you know, some funny stories in there, man. I mean, I had one story, I think everybody's seen Super Troopers. Yep. Where the scene where they try and see how many times they say, right meow, you know, on the traffic stop. And so for me, my guys challenged me. It was back in the time during Snoop Dogg when he's saying for shizzle all the time. And they challenged me that I couldn't say for shizzle a certain number of times during an undercover deal. And you just have to read it, man. Let's say I was successful, but I didn't know that audio was going to go to trial before the jury.
Oh, shit.
And yeah, so they got a laugh out of me. But he got convicted. It was funny, though, man. But
what'd the prosecutor say? What the fuck
oh,
are you
my
doing?
gosh. It's so funny because, like, the jurors, and there was a bunch of law students that were in there observing, and they were just, like, they couldn't even hold it in. A couple of them had to walk out of the courtroom. Because I was actually, this guy was an aspiring rapper, and I'm not a rapper by any means, but he was freestyling during the undercover deal while we're driving to the dealer's house, and he asked me to freestyle. So, literally, I don't even know what I said still to this day, but I got all my for shizzles in there. And I won, so it was all fun and games. And, you know, there's things like that as narcs. We, you know, kind of play tricks on each other. And when I'm, you know, I get taken out whenever there's a buy bust, which is not something I like to do because it can burn you undercover. But they would always give me an extra, you know, when they would search me or yank me out of the car to take me down. They took me down pretty hard. It was all fun and games. We had a good time, you know, there because you do things that nobody else knows about. Right. And that's a secretive unit. But it was fun. I can say that.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you think you'd like to add that you can think of?
Man, I appreciate everybody out there doing what they do in law enforcement. I know these are trying times. Just stick with each other, continue to uphold the law, and always do the right thing. That's the key. And you'll read throughout my books. I go into a couple of stories where I had false allegations made up about me by crackheads or pillheads who are trying to get off of their charges. And I think everybody here has experienced the criminal that files a false complaint against you to discredit you so they can get their charges lowered or dismissed. And I talk about those internal affairs investigations and how they kind of stick with you and haunt you, and when you're the type of cop that holds your integrity to the highest level, when somebody challenges it, it's a big deal. And you do take it personal. The people say all day long, oh, I'll just roll with the punches. But the reality is you challenge my integrity, you're challenging my career, you're challenging my livelihood, you're challenging my everything. So just all I can say is stay the course, watch each other's backs, document everything, and always do the right thing no matter what. It's not going to be the easy thing sometimes, and sometimes you're going to lose the little battles along the way, but you will win the war in the long term. I can promise you that. But check out the book series, A NARC'S TALE. I think you'll enjoy it. Reach out to me at grounsellbooks.com, or you can find me on social media under Keith Grounsell. I have a social media public figure page, and you can contact me. I'll be glad to talk to anybody. I'll fill them in behind the scenes if they want to know more details, but I doubt you're going to find many more details than you'll find in these books.
So a couple things. You talked about never sacrificing your integrity and things like that, and I agree with you. I always tell young officers that. I said, hey, if a guy gets off, but don't ever make it to where the prosecutor doesn't want to put you on the stand because you're a risk. But I ask everybody that comes on here, you've been in law enforcement for a number of years. You have a 5-year, 10-year, 25-year vet in front of you. What do you tell them to survive their career? And I think you answered that by saying always, maintain your integrity and things like that. So in the notes to this episode, there will be a link to grounsellbooks.com. We're going to direct you there rather than on Amazon, because I'm sure Amazon gets a cut. And we want Keith to get his full cut. So that's what I have for you today, folks. And if you get a chance to check out the books, help Keith out. He's one of our own, so let's help him out. So thanks, everybody, for listening, and have a great day.